Alright, well I've got the 1B3 rectifier in here, and it's testing good, but actually too good, because good on this should be 26, and I'm getting like 65 plus. Let me see if I'll turn the lights off if you can see this. That is glowing purple, and that's probably not a good sign, so I am going to replace that. And now let's check on that other tube. This is my triplet 3413B tube tester. It's just an emission type tester, but it can handle all the older tubes, like the 20s and 30s, up through the 40s, 50s. Can't do compactrons or new Visters, but it handles just about everything that I care about. I'm not an audiophile, so I don't care a whole lot about transconductance, but maybe someday I'll get one of those fancy ones, but they go for a fortune these days on eBay. So we have this TG6. 3, 19. And up 5, 8, 0, and down 3, 7. Put the sucker in. I'm going to film and glowed right away, so that's good. A little weak, so I think I'll replace this tube as well. And finally that leaves the fuse. Now, sure, I could just use a digital multimeter, but I just got this a few weeks ago and I've always wanted to get one of these. It's a Hewlett-Packard 410C, which is like the last of the VTVMs, and these are known as being, I think, like the best, the finest VTVM ever made. Check out the size of this thing compared to usual VTVMs, which are a heck of a lot smaller. The circuitry inside is quite amazing. And I think they actually made these up until maybe the early 80s, but certainly into the 70s. And this one has transistors in it. I think some even had some integrated circuits, so these actually aren't all that old. Now, just like my Sencor CR70, which I got cheap, I also got this one really cheap for one very simple reason. It's missing the AC probe, which is this big fat thing that actually has a vacuum tube inside, like a vacuum diode that can rectify AC signals well up into the megahertz range, and that costs quite a bit. But I don't need to do that, you know, I don't work so much with stuff like that, and I think they're really cool. I've also checked some precision resistors with this thing. Without doing any calibration, it's dead on, so yeah, quite nice to have. Oh, I gotta put the camera down because I can't use the test leads with the camera in my hand, so hang on. Alright, well, the fuse is bad. Here's the two leads connected directly together. And here's the fuse, and nothing, so that's not a good sign. So I'm going to replace both the tubes and I'll pop in a new fuse, but I'm going to use the same rating of a 1/4 amp. Now, it's of course entirely possible there's other bad components, bad capacitors and so on, but like I said, this set has been restored at some time in the 80s and the audio does work, so I don't think there's anything critical gone. You know, if the main filter caps were bad, there'd be a lot of hum in the audio. So if all this stuff is okay, there's other problems too, like there's a damper tube, I think probably this guy. Otherwise, it could be these power resistors. Or, you know, worst case scenario, the flyback's bad. Visually though, it looks okay, so, you know, worse, if none of this stuff I'm about to do works out, I can pull the chassis out and use this ICO 944 flyback and yoke tester. What this will do, it'll form a tank circuit with the flyback and tell me if there's any opens or shorted windings in it. First up, I'll check the tubes though, or swap out the tubes and swap out that fuse. Alright, I popped in a new 6BG6 and a 1/4 amp fuse. Now I'm just going to find a good 1B3. I've got a pretty healthy stash of tubes here in this tube caddy, and I've got another one out in the garage and a few more boxes stashed away. What this represents is many years when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, back in the early 80s, of riding around the suburbs and plucking tubes out of TVs. I don't know why, but I was fascinated by TVs early on. But being on a bike, I couldn't bring the sets home, so I would just pop the backs off, pop out the tubes, and I kept them all these years. And recently I got a whole bunch of empty tube cartons, so I started going through and actually testing these tubes. So now that I've got some old sets to work on, I actually have a stash of tubes that are good. And believe it or not, most sets, when they're dead, it's not because of bad tubes, it's because of bad caps, or they were just obsolete. So out of all the I've tested hundreds of tubes, and it's about I say about 85% good, maybe 10% fair, and only about 5% are actually bad. Now that's more like it. This tube is actually supposed to read about 26 for a good tube, and I don't see a blue glow, so let's pop this sucker in. I'll button this set up, and let's see what happens. Alright, as they say, the moment of truth. Between the fuse on the flyback, the fuse on my variac, and I'm going to listen really carefully to see if anything sounds bad, and I'm going to look to see if anything is going bad. Hopefully nothing will get burned out if there is a problem. Alright, here we go. Got some. And a little faint tinkling. Saw a little flash in the high voltage section. I think the fuse mate is blown again, so that flyback may be bad after all. Nobody ever said this stuff was easy. And you can see the 6BG6 is glowing, but I think either the rectifier or I think the fuse blew. So, alright, well, that's all I'm going to do for now. I'll take my time and go over this in more detail and see if I can figure out what's going on with this set. And I'll record a video. I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually. I hope you enjoyed this couple of videos on the Admiral 24A12. That's all for tonight.